A Texas man staying in jail after being convicted and sentenced this afternoon for stalking Indiana Fever star Caitlin Clark.
So Rich and I was actually in the courtroom this afternoon, and it was a contentious court hearing. Rich is here to share what happened.
Law enforcement got involved when he drove to Indy from Texas in January and started hanging out around places where he might see Caitlin Clark. It was a little bit bizarre, actually, to be in the courtroom this afternoon. Somewhat entertaining as well, I have to admit. Michael Lewis admits he tagged Caitlin Clark in 800 messages on the social media X.
What if I told you that Caitlin Clark faced something far more terrifying than opponents on the court? Something that made her fear for her safety every day. And what's worse, the person responsible just got a slap on the wrist. You need to hear the full story of the stalker who went way too far and walked away with a shockingly light sentence.
Police visited Lewis at his downtown hotel room back in January and warned Lewis to stop threatening Clark on X. But the messages continued. Lewis took a plea deal this afternoon for stalking and harassment. Those messages sent to Clark were described as lewd, obscene, and threatening. Lewis was interrupted by the judge multiple times during his statement in court this afternoon.
Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video.
I'm not a threat to her or any other player in the NBA whatsoever.
He may continue to talk, but he is going to talk himself right out of a plea if he continues down this road. I am not going to accept a plea of guilty for somebody who says they are not guilty.
I've never threatened her. I've never even thought about threatening her. I've never even thought about thinking about threatening her. I will never threaten her.
Judge Angela Dow Davis did sentence Lewis to 2.5 years in the Department of Correction under the terms of the plea deal. He'll likely stay right there at the Marion County Adult Detention Center, and that's where he has been.
Imagine being one of the most exciting athletes in the country, inspiring millions with your skill, but behind the scenes, you're living in fear. That's exactly what Caitlin Clark endured when Michael Lewis turned his admiration into something much darker. This wasn't just the usual overzealous fan behavior. Lewis sent messages so disturbing that they forced Clark to change how she lived her day-to-day life. At first, it started with inappropriate comments online, but Lewis quickly escalated. These weren't harmless calls for attention. No, his messages became deeply unsettling. They were sexual, graphic, and crossed every imaginable boundary. And then there was the alarming 911 reference. In one of his chilling messages, he casually mentioned the number, not as a cry for help, but in a way that hinted at some kind of ominous plan.
Yeah, bizarre is a good way to describe it. We were listening in on the hearing from the newsroom today, and Lewis seemed to blame Clark's social media for not stopping him. Can you explain that?
Well, he says that they had so many opportunities, 800 since he was arrested back in January. Lewis was living out of his vehicle when he came to Indiana. The Indiana Fever offered no comment on this plea deal today, but the prosecution says that Caitlin Clark was aware of the terms and was in agreement with the plea deal. Messages, in fact, where they could have blocked him on X at any time, and then he would have gone home, and it would have ended at that point.
It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was terrifying. But what shocked everyone the most was how Lewis talked about himself. In one series of messages, he described himself as Caitlin's slave. That term alone sent a horrifying ripple through everyone involved, from law enforcement to Caitlin's team. It was a chilling window into his mindset, showing how deeply twisted his obsession had become. What's even scarier? Lewis didn't stop at making threats from behind a screen. He followed through. This man traveled all the way from Texas to Indianapolis. Think about that, hundreds of miles just to close the distance between himself and Clark. For someone like Caitlin, who already sacrifices so much to perform on the biggest stages, this fear forced her to change her routines and second-guess her public appearances. Imagine not even feeling safe showing up to do what you love most. Stalkers like Lewis aren't just nuisances, they create a constant undercurrent of fear. When we think about athletes or public figures, we often forget they're still people. And Caitlin? She's a young woman whose life was completely disrupted by someone who refused to respect boundaries. But here's the wild part. As serious as this situation was, the legal system barely treated it that way. How does a story like this end with such leniency? Imagine knowing that someone who harassed and stalked you could be free in just 18 months. That's what Caitlin Clark has to deal with after Michael Lewis, the man behind the terrifying messages and obsessive behavior, received a sentence of 2.5 years in prison, with most of that already served. He'll spend less than 2 years behind bars for actions that went far beyond creepy and landed squarely in the realm of dangerous. This isn't justice. It's a slap on the wrist. Okay, so the judge tacked on a few extra conditions. Lewis is now required to get mental health treatment, and there's a ban keeping him from attending venues like Fever or Pacers games where Clark might appear. But let's be real, does that actually solve the problem or even protect Caitlin in the long run? Everyone who's heard about this case is asking the same thing. How can something so serious end with someone walking away from prison in what feels like no time? This wasn't just about hurtful words on the internet. The weight of the explicit threats and the obsessive travel from Texas to Indiana doesn't seem to match the punishment handed down. And what's even worse is that this is part of a larger pattern. The legal system often struggles to take stalking cases, especially ones involving celebrities or athletes, as seriously as it should. It's not like we haven't seen examples of how devastating this can be. Remember the case of Rebecca Schaefer? A young actress whose stalker also started with invasive behavior before it escalated into tragedy. That's why so many people are angry. They know the consequences of ignoring behavior like this and worry it could happen again. Above all, the leniency here raises one major question. What message does this send? If someone can commit acts this alarming and walk free before 2 years are up, what's stopping the next person? Something has to change. Because right now, it feels like Caitlin and others in her position are left without the protection they deserve. Caitlin Clark's story isn't just about one stalker. It's a wake-up call about how the system handles these situations. A person should never feel unsafe doing what they love. Yet that's exactly where Caitlin finds herself, all because Michael Lewis was let off too easy. 18 months for what he did? It doesn't add up, and it's not just her fight. This highlights a bigger problem. Protecting public figures needs to be taken seriously. Imagine athletes feeling truly safe, knowing the system has their back. That starts with us demanding stronger laws, better protections, and the accountability victims like Caitlin deserve.